Today's reading is taken from John chapter 11. It's quite a long reading, so I'll read it and I'll make one or two comments as we go through. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death, it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. John is here setting up the scene of all that is to come, and we're introduced to Mary, Martha, and to Lazarus. This is a family that Jesus clearly knows. Lazarus is somebody we see in the passage that Jesus loves, and he's ill, and he's sick. And so at first glance, you might think that this is a miracle where Jesus heals Lazarus, because after all, that's what we've seen him do with others. But it would appear that Jesus has something else in mind, and it's rather perplexing. Because as John goes through the next paragraph, we see that Jesus acts in a way that, frankly, is quite unexpected. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Why? Why is it that Jesus loved this family? He loved Martha and sister and Lazarus. John tells us this. So why doesn't he rush to their aid? Why is it that he stays put for 2 whole days? What's he playing at here? This is odd behaviour. This is not what we'd expect somebody to do. If you hear that a dear friend of yours is sick and ill and they've called for you to come, well, you drop everything and come. But Jesus stayed put for 2 days. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? The disciples, you see, assumed that the reason why Jesus wasn't rushing down is because it was dangerous for him. Not that Jesus was cowardly, but merely prudent. He wanted to avoid the potential danger. After all, the Jews had tried to stone him last time he was there, so why would he rush back down? But Jesus quickly puts that to one side. Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Jesus isn't stumbling around in the darkness. Jesus isn't hiding in the shadows. No, that's not why he didn't go down south. He carries on. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, so that we may die with him. So he's waited here until he knew that Lazarus was dead. He clearly had knowledge of Lazarus's demise, and it's that which then prompted him to go to Bethany. Not that he was keeping away because of any trouble, but rather he was waiting until Lazarus had died, which is an odd response to do. But nonetheless, the disciples accept this and they head down with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Martha had caught wind that Jesus was coming, that Jesus was nearby, and so she rushes out to see him. And was there a faint tone of rebuke, perhaps, in her voice? Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. She clearly had called Jesus, hoping for a healing, and he'd let her down. He hadn't come. He'd waited until he knew that Lazarus was dead. But Martha is a woman of great faith. She realizes that even now not all is lost, and so she says to Jesus, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." So there's a faint hope, there's a trust, there's faith in this woman. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Now, Jesus was talking about himself raising Lazarus, but Martha in her mind had got the general resurrection of the dead, that the life after death, the resurrection to judgment. There was an understanding within Judaism that there was life after death, and we see in Job, "I will see that my Redeemer lives." But Jesus was about something else. He carries on. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." Yes, there is resurrection, Jesus is saying, but there's resurrection because Jesus himself is the resurrection and the life. Remember that John described Jesus as the Word, right at the beginning of John's Gospel. Remember also that John, in that passage, was consciously echoing Genesis and the account of creation. God spoke and life came into being. God spoke a word and the word went out and the life came into being in response to the word. If Jesus is the word, he's the agent through whom life came into being. God spoke, Jesus the word brought life. So it is that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Jesus is the principle of life. That's why Jesus can restore life to Lazarus. Remember, Jesus said elsewhere, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." Remember also that Jesus said of his own crucifixion, "I lay down my life and I will take it up again." Jesus is life. He has life in himself, as is said elsewhere in John's Gospel. And this is what we will see in the remainder of this passage. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Here we have Jesus, the resurrection and the life, confronting and witnessing the dread consequences of death. He's seeing the grief that is there. He's seeing the tears that are not only in the eyes of Mary, but those who were with her. Jesus, the life, the one who brought life to all, now sees death, and he's deeply troubled by it. He's greatly moved by it. Life has met death, but life will overcome death. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" And of course the answer to that question is, of course he could. But that's not what he was here to do. This is not what he was trying to achieve. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odour, for he has been dead 4 days." So Jesus wants access to Lazarus. Jesus wants the stone to be rolled away from the tomb. Jesus wants something to happen, and Martha is concerned. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. He's been in the tomb in the heat of the Middle Eastern sun. She knows that corruption would have set in by now. She knows that there would be a stench. He's not just a little bit dead, he's very dead indeed. But this, of course, is simply setting the scene for what is about to come. This is simply the uttermost death come into contact with the resurrection and the life. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who died came out, his hands and his feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. That was the point. This is why Jesus had waited for those 2 days before coming down. Because he wasn't wanting to heal Lazarus, he was going to do something greater. By simply speaking, he was going to bring forth Lazarus from the tomb. The one through whom all life came into being was, through words, going to call life once more into being in the person of Lazarus. He prayed aloud so that all would know what he was about to do. That's why Jesus waited, because there was something greater afoot. The resurrection and the life was to come into contact with death and then call the dead back to life. This is the Christ that we follow, the Christ who calls our name. He calls your name. Will you not follow and respond?